what got you smitten? What got you into this genre?
It was always there. I mean, when I was growing up, it was always there. It wasn't really a question of getting into it. You'd have to work to get out of it, if you like. I mean, it was, yeah, all over the place. I mean, and when I was a kid as well, it was in the pop charts. You'd have, you know, artists like Nicky Thomas and Bob and Marcia and that would be on top of the pops every week. This was when I was about 13, 14. When also the Trojan Tighten Up series, you could buy a whole album for 10 shillings or something, you know, which you won't have a clue what a shilling was, but it was like the equivalent of 50 pence. You could buy a whole album with different tracks on, you know, and it was great. It was the only way kids of my age could buy an album. It was great. So it was one of those things. It was really easy to go along with it. And then there was always kind of dances and house parties and going on around where I lived. So you just sort of drifted along to them. It was a bit like wallpaper. It was always there. So it was impossible to ignore.
And what was going on in your own household, in your own family? Were your parents into the music?
No, not at all. I don't know if my mum liked music at all. I can't remember really. My dad really liked jazz and classical music. So that was pretty much it. My brother, who I shared a room with for years, he was like a hippie, you know? And so he was listening to rock music all the time. Yeah, that's pretty much what I grew up with. But outside of the house, it's a different matter.
Yeah. So which track for you has stood the test of time from, I suppose, from your formative years?
The funny thing is they wouldn't, probably not from my formative years. Stuff that I probably stumbled on later from that time, and I suppose it must have been around in the ether, was probably rock steady tracks, stuff like the Paragons and the Melodians, that sort of thing. I really liked that because I liked the singing and such. So this would have been mid 1960s, late 1960s.
So what is it about the music that just makes that you just like? Is it just that you managed to find a genre that you really enjoyed and you've just been running with it? Or what is it about it that just floats your boat?
I think one of the reasons I liked Rocksteady so much was because it was so musical. There was a real kind of intricate arrangement and musicality going on in so much of that stuff. And I just found it fascinating. I just liked it. You know, it had more to it than kind of the pop music you'd get on the radio, you know, the BBC radio at that time. Because it was a black music, it was something that was therefore yours. You know, you went to parties where everybody in there would look like you. So it was, that immediately felt better than going to some sort of dodgy old disco somewhere. Yeah, it was all of that. It was just became a kind of soundtrack to a life, really. And it suited it. But it wasn't, you know, I didn't just listen to reggae. I liked Motown, I liked soul music, you know, because there was a few of those soul samplers about. You know, I can remember going to see those Motown shows as well as going to see sort of reggae shows at Hammersmith Palais and this sort of stuff. So it was just general. I liked music and I felt closer to black music. So I was always more attracted to that.
Sure. So you recently interviewed Jimmy Cliff, who's one of the giants of the music. What was that like? What is he like? What is he doing these days?
He lives in North Miami. It's like Little Kingston, really. It's so Jamaican. And Jimmy, I've known Jimmy for years, you know, about 25 years. And he's a lovely bloke. He's one of the most laid back, funny, sharp, agreeable people you could meet. He's a brilliant interview because he'll talk about anything. He'll always do his best to answer your questions properly and often take you to places with his answers that you didn't realize were there.
Well, he looks amazing. He looks really youthful still. You were saying he's what? Yeah. In his 80s now, yeah?
The thing about so many reggae artists is they started really young. So you might assume they're older than they are. He got in the music business when he was about 15, something like that.
So what was it about that period of time and the synchronicity of all of those artists? You got Desmond Dekker, you got Toots and the Maytals, you got Jimmy Cliff. What can you tell us about that moment, that defining moment in time?
The harder they come, that was the moment that reggae announced itself to the world in its own terms, not in anybody else's terms, not the kind of things we'd seen on Top of the Pops in London, you know, with the strings added and, you know, people looking, you know, so all this sort of polyester you'd see there, right? But this was Jamaica as it is, not Jamaica of a tourist video, and wanted to set this in a real music industry. So many other people were essentially playing themselves, you know, the producers, the people in the studios and that. There was, Jimmy told me there was only one professional actor, in the cast, that everybody else was people like him who figured they could act anyway.
And of course, the part was going to go originally to Johnny Nash was going to play that role.
I did hear that. Jimmy was offered the part pretty quickly. I think once Perry Hensel had met him, it became obvious, you know, that he was this brash young man who could play this brash young man on the screen. But it was like we'd never seen reggae before. There was no pop videos at that point. So you had no context with which to put reggae in. If you were like myself, you know, a kid growing up in North London who'd never been to Jamaica, I had no context to put reggae in. As soon as that film arrived, suddenly it all made sense. It was more than just a pop music. There was a whole kind of...
There's a whole culture, isn't there? I mean, and it goes with the style, it goes with the swagger, it goes with the attitude. I mean, look at the way they dress. It's that whole thing about, you know, this is our thing, this is our style, we're defining it. And these people are cutting the road. There's no road. This hasn't happened before.
Yeah, that's it. For more than just, say, us kids growing up in London, right? It made sense to the rest of the world. Suddenly it wasn't just some flimsy pop music. It had the substance of, you know, folk or rock or something like that. And it meant that the music industry, if nothing else, sat up and took it seriously. So it was a massively important moment, not only for Jamaica and Black Jamaican culture, but for reggae as a worldwide force.
Wonderful. So this will be a really good opportunity, I think, for us to pay tribute to some of the giants of the music who've passed relatively recently. Leroy passed in February this year. Just how significant was Leroy as a character, as an architect of the music?
As a character, he was immense. He brought his character to what he did. He was one of the nicest people I've ever met. More significantly, perhaps, was he was not the first person to put toasting on record, but the first person to sell toasting on record, to do it well. He was huge in Jamaica. And then I remember over here, this blue album called Version Galore. I think I was about 15 or so when I got a copy of that. It was amazing. I just never heard anything like it. Nobody had. You know, this was proper Jamaican sound system toasting. And he became the touchstone for it because his records did so well and took it where it needed to go. Leroy was, he wasn't the first, but he was the best at it. You know, he had it all. He had the musicality in what he did. He had the sense of fun. He was inventive. You know, no, he was great. He really was the right person to take it to where it went, where toasting went.
Okay, so we can also talk about Bunny Wailer, of course, who died in March. Again, how significant a loss to the music and the culture is that?
I think the chemistry or the alchemy, if you like, of Peter, Bob and Bunny together as the Wailers was never bettered. They were as important to those early things as Bob Marley himself. Also, Black Heart Man is it's one of the best 5 reggae albums ever made. Black Heart Man is a fantastic album. I mean, that really shows you what Bunny was capable of, or what he wanted to do by himself.
So, and then last year in September, Toots Hibbert passed away. Again, another architect of the music.
Toots, or the Maytals, really. I mean, I think if you're talking about architects of the music, I think really look at them as the group, the Maytals, rather than simply Toots, right? What Toots did, or the Maytals did, fairly uniquely at that point, they brought gospel into it. It was incredible because you don't hear a lot of that gospel stylings, if you like, in early reggae, but they brought it through completely. It was like that kind of raw, mad gospel.
I guess that brings us on to Bob Marley, and this year is the 40th anniversary of the uprisings. Right across the whole of the United Kingdom, there was uprising and outrage at what was happening politically, socially, economically, and especially confrontation with the police. I wondered whether the Bob Marley's Uprising album, which came out around that time, had any influence on what subsequently happened. What are your thoughts?
I doubt that very much, to be quite honest, because it was such a terrible album. I completely respect Bob Marley as the artist he is, but everybody's entitled to a couple of bad albums, and that was one of his. Uprising was an awful album. I really doubt if it inspired anybody to do anything other than kind of turn over and go back to sleep.
So let's talk about what we mentioned Uprising in the UK 40 years ago, which this year is the 40th anniversary of what happened in 81. What was happening as far as the music was concerned? Which were the groups that were, or the singers, the performers, and what was going on musically with reggae?
Well, musically, reggae was shifting at that point. I mean, dancehall was starting to happen. It was at this point, this kind of crossroads where people are a bit fed up with roots reggae. It's like, well, yeah, we've had roots for 10 years and nothing's really changed. It's not made any difference. Actually, let's have a bit of fun now. 1980, we're what, 2 years away from Yellow Man? That's sort of almost diametrically opposite. But Lone Ranger was starting to make records then. The dancehall toasters were starting to come up and the music was shifting. I mean, it's reggae or Jamaican music is probably one of the fastest turning over styles or genres of music you could ever think about. It turns over all the time. The problem was the mainstream music industry, both here and in America, embraced roots reggae because it was all these songs of sufferation and anguished howls from the ghetto, because that's how so many mainstream record executives saw Black people and Black music as this is what it is. It's a protest music.
Is that protest or is that victimization? What would you say?
I'd just say it's laziness. It's like you can't be bothered to think about it in any other way. It must be this. And trouble is that becomes its own narrative. It's like, well, if it's not that, then it can't be real.
So what about people like Aswad and Steel Pulse and who else was around in this time? Was it Matumbi and groups like that?
I thought they were fantastic because they approached reggae from a group perspective, a musical group perspective. So therefore there was a musicality about what they did. And I think, Handsworth Revolution is one of the best reggae albums ever made. Matumbi's Seven Seals is another brilliant album, so that's what I liked about it. And also, like Lovers Rock, it was relevant in, well, I'll say London, but I assume there's a world outside London in England. But it made sense to us. It sounded like music that we heard all the time. There was a lot of this in Lovers Rock because, of course, Dennis and the Matumbi players did a lot of the Lovers Rock backing. So, yeah, I mean, I love those British groups.
A question that people will want to ask is, and it might be just a kind of, soundbite type of question, but when people ask who is Marley's natural successor, who would you point to?
I'd say that when Bob died, there was an awful lot of sort of panic and talk in the music media, in the music business about, oh, who's the next Bob Marley? There was all sorts of people were offered up. And it just seemed to be if you were kind of reasonably good looking, had dreadlocks and could carry a tune, you essentially became the next Bob Marley. Dennis Brown was offered up, Maxie Priest was offered up, Beres Hammond was offered up, all of this. But to talk about the next Bob Marley is to completely miss the point of the original Bob Marley. He was unique. He was there because he did what he did. And the people elected him. He wasn't pushed on them as, here he is, so here's the next one. It's being reductive as to say reggae has to have Bob Marley, otherwise it can't exist, so therefore characters like Big Youth and Burning Spear from the same era don't count. So that's it. So yeah, that's my views on the next Bob Marley.
Sure, I think that's a good point. So what about women in reggae? What can you say? Because we've got people like Marcia Griffiths, obviously from back in the day, and she's still performing. What about the new crop of women who are very distinguished?
What I'd like to see in reggae and in not just in black music, actually in sort of popular music across the board, is more women as executives, as producers, as people sitting in offices. Because, yeah, there's loads of singers and Lovers Rock was great and it had loads of singers, but it would have been nice if some women had been producing those singers, had been working the board or whatever. That's what I'd like to see. I think, there's a great crop of singers and there always will be, but I'd love to see more decisions and more real creativity coming from women.
So from rocksteady to reggae to and you have all these different dimensions of the music: dancehall, bashment, revival, lovers rock. Where are we now?
I've not really got a clue because it changes so fast now. The turnover is so fast now that reggae culture has gone international and is influencing things like jungle, grime, reggaeton. So I think that's where we are now. That's where it's at. And that is incredibly important.